Lora, welcome to Constitutional Chats. We're so happy to have you with us.
Well, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
We're going to ask if you'd like to just make some opening comments on our issue of the Constitution and the border, and then we'll go to questions.
Sure. We are living day to day right now through a border crisis that is creating a growing constitutional new question about whether an invasion is occurring and a true test of federalism. So in the Constitution, in Article 1, which is about the legislative branch, it says that Congress has the authority to create the rule for naturalization. And what that translates to is Congress sets the immigration laws, the border laws, who can come to the U.S. and under what sorts of conditions, for how long, that sort of thing. When someone is deportable, when someone can naturalize, those sorts of issues. And then, of course, the executive branch under the president is responsible for carrying out those laws and implementing them. And so it is the Department of Homeland Security and the executive branch that has that responsibility. And there are multiple agencies within DHS, Homeland Security. There's U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which is responsible for the border. And then there is Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which enforces the laws more in the interior of the U.S. And then there's the benefit agency, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and they administer immigration benefits like asylum and green cards and permanent visas, et cetera, and work authorization. So it is the federal government largely that is responsible for enforcing our laws. But, states have a role as well. And so states can act in areas on issues where states have primary jurisdiction. And so some examples would be driver's licenses. That's not a federal issue, that's a state issue. And so states can decide whether they're going to give driver's licenses to someone who's here either on a green card or a temporary visa, or if someone is here illegally, whether they get driver's licenses. States can decide matters dealing with business licenses, license plates, employment. So states can require the people residing in that state to use the E-Verify tool, which is the automatic employment verification tool, to decide or determine whether an applicant for a job is authorized to work here. There are public education issues that states have primary jurisdiction in. So some states allow green card holders, temporary visa holders, or illegal aliens to attend public schools, for example, grad school and colleges. The Supreme Court has decided that, or ruled that in 1982, that K through 12 public schools must allow for illegal alien students to attend those. So with Texas, we have a situation right now where the Biden administration is generally not enforcing the immigration laws. From the very beginning of the administration, the Secretary of Homeland Security issued memos to the heads of the three agencies I talked about, CBP, ICE, and USCIS, and basically said, we're going to limit our priorities on enforcing immigration because we have limited resources. And so in terms of enforcement, they prioritized investigating, detaining, removing those aliens who are either national security threats, terrorists, spies, some convicted aggravated felons, but not all, and those who illegally entered after the last presidential election. Now, the border agents have largely been processing in those that they encounter at the border into the U.S. per the direction of this administration. And Texas is, due to geography, faces the brunt of it, since so many people are crossing the southern border illegally. And Texans, the Texas governor, the Texas law enforcement said, this is unacceptable. We need to protect our own citizens. We cannot sustain the numbers of people and the costs associated with it, and the death that comes from fentanyl, the migrants who are dying and need rescuing due to dangerous conditions, et cetera. So the Texas governor has taken several steps to place the National Guard along the Texas border, Texas Department of Public Safety. They have put up concertina wire along the border to try and discourage migrants from crossing there. They have prosecuted state violations. So if illegal aliens came and then committed a state crime, they would arrest them and prosecute them for that. And then recently, the state of Texas, the legislature, passed a new law making it a state crime to illegally cross the border into Texas. So meanwhile, the Border Patrol had been going in and repeatedly cutting Texas's concertina wire to help assist illegal aliens enter Texas and then process them north. And so Texas sued the Biden administration and said, at least in this area of Eagle Pass, Texas, which is a high cross area, there is a section of land there that is city owned and it is privately owned. It is not federally owned. So Texas took over that area, that it's a park and there's a boat ramp there, and basically kicked out the border agents and sued the Biden administration for trespassing and for destruction of property, namely cutting the wire. And so that case has gone up to the Supreme Court. It's now back in the lower courts. But the Biden administration 2 Fridays ago gave an ultimatum, or a deadline rather, to Texas saying, you need to let us back into this Eagle Pass area. The deadline came and went. The federal government didn't do anything about it in particular. The case continues in court. And meanwhile, Governor Abbott of Texas has declared this to be an invasion, which is a novel issue that will likely go to the Supreme Court. And the question is, did the founders, when they wrote that into the Constitution, what did they have in mind by invasion? Did they have an army crossing our border, committing incursions, requiring uniforms, requiring visible weapons? Is that what is meant by an invasion? Or is it a broader term that can include thousands of perhaps Chinese that enter each month, or Iranians, or large groups of illegal aliens from adversary countries? And so that is going to be a novel question for the Supreme Court. But at the same time, in other cases, the Supreme Court has ruled, so long as a state law is consistent with federal law, a state can enforce that law. And it is illegal under the federal government or the federal laws to cross into the US without being inspected or without having documentation. So for a state to pass that same law, that would be consistent. So how would the court rule on that? So these are some of the issues that unfold day by day, and it'll be interesting to watch. We are in interesting times. So I will pause there and we can start having a discussion.
Well, thank you. That's a great summary. Really appreciate it. And Janine, we're going to go to you.
Yes, that was excellent. Thank you so much. I don't even really know where to begin. Talk to me about this aspect of people coming across with absolutely no name. I have no ID. You don't have my name. I'm not going to give you my name. And people are coming in with no names. And then when they, like what happened with the police officers that were attacked in New York City, and they try to find them or prosecute them, and they say, I don't have a name. I mean, what is that all about? And what does the Constitution say? I mean, how do you handle that?
So it's basically they're trying to avoid being vetted. And you'll also see down on the border now a lot of ditched documents. And that is about applying for asylum here when, in fact, I'll use, for example, Haiti. So Haitians will come to the US, they'll cross the southern border, but they haven't necessarily been in Haiti the past several years. They were actually relocated in, say, Chile or Ecuador for a number of years where they had safe haven. And so they come to the US with their Chilean or their Ecuadorian identity document, but they know, and they're coached, that they will have an easier time to get asylum here in the US if they say, you can't send me back to Haiti, I'm going to be persecuted. Because the law says if you've already been firmly resettled elsewhere, you're not eligible for asylum here. So they need to get rid of their evidence that they've been in Ecuador or Chile for a number of years and were already given safe haven. And then say, I'm Haitian, I don't have documentation, you can't send me back to Haiti because I'll be persecuted, with good chance right now that they will be released into the US to disappear.
With no
And in
name.
terms of the criminals, I mean, we're dealing with, because our border agents are so overwhelmed, they don't have the time to do very thorough vetting of so many who are coming here. And if they've not been to the US before, they're not going to hit against any record we have crime-wise here in the US, but they may very well have a crime record back in their home country. And if the border agents, once they go back to, the office and can run some fingerprints or information, they may hit on a foreign crime, but by that time, often those aliens are long gone into the interior of the US. So it's trying to avoid vetting.
But what do you do with these people that say that won't give a name? They're allowed in as well? Just no name? Because I'm hearing that
a lot of
there are
times they'll come
laws
up
about
with
how to. Go ahead.
a lot of times they'll just come up with a fake name, a new identity. It's kind of like starting over. And so it's a clean identity. It's neither the name or the date of birth or the biographical information will hit against anything because it's fraudulent, it's made up.
Mhm. Yeah, well, it is such a complicated issue. I mean, we're America, and we certainly want people to be able to come to this country and claim asylum. It's just the sheer magnitude of numbers. Where are we now? 8 million?
Well, if you
10 million?
count,
300,000 a month?
yeah, it's over 8 million that CBP has encountered while Biden has been in office. And then once you add the gotaways, which is up to about 1.8 million now, then you're over 10.4, 10.5 million.
And that's like, I've heard these stats. It's 23 of our state's population combined.
Yeah,
right?
last I checked, it was like state number 15, I think, largest.
Well, we are, yeah. What do you mean 15 largest?
So if you
What-
took
what
10
do-
million and looked at the populations of the states, that would be the 15th largest state.
Right. Or it's a bunch of states put together don't even have 10 million people. I mean, that's the thing that's amazing when you think about it.
Yes.
It's um it was really interesting about the states, what the states can say and what the federal government can do, and that the states can say, no, you're not going to be issued a driver's license, or yes, you're going to be issued a driver's license, and things of that nature. And the sanctuary cities, which are starting to really, really, really upset people in New York City and whatnot, because they're getting free housing, they're getting debit cards, they're 60 day, and all the New Yorkers are like, wait, it's my tax money. Where's my free house? Where's my free healthcare? But are sanctuary cities even legal?
Well, I mean, it's the states or the city or the locality that either votes or just kind of declares. In many cases, it's just the mayor or the leader declaring, we are a sanctuary jurisdiction and we are not going to cooperate with ICE and federal immigration officials. If we are going to release someone from state or local jail, we're not going to notify ICE. If ICE finds out and says, and puts a detainer on that criminal alien and says, jail, please hold them for 3 hours, we're coming to pick them up, we're not going to honor it, we're going to release that person anyway, or we're not going to share information. They might put it in a state or local law, they might just declare it, but the result is
Is
the
it
same.
legal? but is it legal to do that? Because it's going against federal law. And it's interesting, it's an interesting dynamic to think about flipping that.
Yeah.
You have sanctuary cities saying, we're not going to abide by the federal rules. Okay, the federal rules, and we're not going to abide by them. And yet, in the southern border, if Texas wants to say, we're not going to abide by the federal rules, it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to come, oh my gosh. But the sanctuary cities aren't abiding by the federal rules either, but everybody just lets that slide. I think it's the same process. It's both states potentially doing it in certain situations, but one gets highlighted as a terrible thing and the other is like, oh, isn't this fabulous? Would you not, you understand what I'm saying?
Right,
It's the same dynamic.
And the twist to it is, in the case of Texas, they are actually trying to enforce immigration laws. So, and it's the federal government that won't do its job.
Yeah.
And
I
yes,
live in Texas. I live in Texas. So, it as far as I'm concerned, this is all, 3 years too late, but I'm glad we're doing it. You know what I
right.
mean? And very, very interesting. And I need to pass. But Lacey, are you holding up signs? I never get to see signs anymore. We haven't figured out the timing thing, Lacey. I don't know how much time I have. So, can what I think is interesting is that two more things I'd like to ask, but I don't know my time. So Lacey, hold up a card or something, please. Can you talked about private property, right?
Mhm.
So if you own property on the border, no one's allowed to come over that property legally? With the federal government, you mentioned that. So I just want to have you elaborate on that a little bit. Private
Right.
property was
So, I
one of the
mean, a ranch
saying they
owner,
own the property. Go ahead.
a ranch owner can call upon their state or local law enforcement and say, hey, someone's trespassing. And so Texas is, trying to help in that regard. If the state or the ranch owner gives the federal government access to patrol their land, then, in theory, the federal government would be enforcing the law that way. And so it's interesting that Texas has taken this small piece of land and kicked out basically said, no, we're taking back authority, federal government or agents, for you being here. And so far it's still a standoff.
If I own federal, this will be my last question. If I own property on the border, is there an easement for the government? Can they come in and claim an easement? Or am I allowed to say, this is my private property and these people are not allowed to trespass over it? I mean, what are the rules and what's the law there? Because they've certainly been trespassing over people's private property.
Right. It depends on the terms of the deed. I mean, perhaps there's a pre-existing easement in the deed. Maybe there isn't. But if you've got someone trespassing, then most homeowners and ranchers want help from law enforcement, whether that's state, local, or federal, and they give
So the
permission
federal
for the agents
government
to come
can't
in.
trump it. If I own property on the border and there is no deed of an easement, then the government should not be allowing people to cross through my private property. The federal government should not be allowing this. Is that true?
Yes.
If there's no easement?
Oh, if you're saying, can the federal government even go in if there's no easement?
No, I'm saying if I own land that's right up against it and there's no easement and people are illegally crossing my property, the federal government should be defending me because people are illegally crossing into my property and they're not even doing that.
Correct. And that's, trespassing, but that's generally a state violation versus a federal violation. The federal violation comes in by the fact that they illegally entered the country, whether it's your property or somebody else's.
Yeah. Well, I just hear there are all these people in South Texas they're just crossing the property, but somehow the federal government hasn't allowed anybody to take the state to go in and say, stop this. I mean, are you saying the state can do it, should just be doing it anyway?
Well, the state can prosecute, and Texas has been, for the state violation of trespassing. That's irrespective of what whether the federal government is keeping people out of the US or not. Both those things can happen in parallel and should be. But right now, the federal government isn't doing its job. So Texas is trying to prosecute state trespass laws. And now it's enforced its newest Texas law of you can't illegally enter Texas either from Mexico.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Well, it's a very fascinating topic, and thank you for your expertise. It seems to me that in all the situations, even if you were to own property and people are crossing through that property, it's because the federal government is allowing them to come in and, not taking proper measure to protect the people, and then prohibiting the states from taking actions and handcuffing everybody to be able to do anything. Don't citizens have rights? You know what I mean? Citizens have rights. It's citizens own property and you should be protected. Okay, that's one of our basic tenets, right? Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and property. Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, thank you for being on. I wanted to ask a bit more about the constitutionality of declaring the crisis at the border as an invasion. So could you talk a bit about what the precedent for this legal move is, and then what would actually having that be declared as an invasion? What does that actually change about border policy or what's happening there?
So I believe this is a novel issue for dealing with mass illegal immigration. The circumstances on the ground that caused Texas Governor Abbott to declare an invasion by cartels and by large numbers of illegal aliens. There's 2 sections in the US Constitution that address this. And basically, the notion is the federal government is responsible for protecting the states. There's a compact there, and Governor Abbott has said the Biden administration has broken that compact. It is not doing its job to protect the states. We should not be left helpless, and therefore we, Texas, are going to protect our own border. Now, so far, Governor Abbott, if they are arresting or detaining illegal aliens, they are either prosecuting them under Texas law or at most turning them over to a port of entry where Customs and Border Protection officers work. But the net result there is still the same, because the Biden administration has generally directed CBP agents to process illegal aliens and release them north. If Texas captures illegal aliens and takes them over to a port of entry and hands them off to CBP, CBP is just going to send them north. If Governor Abbott ordered the National Guard or the Texas Department of Public Policy or Texas Department of Public Safety to deport an illegal alien into Mexico, it would be a whole new ball game. That hasn't happened because the federal government would surely come in and arrest the guard, arrest the Texas Department of Public Safety officer, and the governor doesn't want that, which is why it hasn't happened. If it did, this case and this issue of invasion would be moving up the court system a lot faster. But right now it's a bit of a standoff. So the merits case, which is in the district court, is about the trespassing of the federal government on Texas land and the destruction of property. And we will see if the invasion question gets wound into that case or if a whole nother separate case is going to be created around invasion. But if it gets to the Supreme Court, I think they're going to look at what did the framers mean by that term. Again, how narrow or broad is that term? Is it just, does it require military and uniforms and guns crossing into the US? Is it cartels having operational control of the border? Is it large numbers of illegal aliens from adversarial countries? That's the question to be answered. And it's interesting and new.
Yeah, interesting. That certainly does seem novel. I wonder what are the specific attributes of the influx of immigrants to the southern border that the governor is arguing constitutes an invasion, and then what what are we comparing that to? Is there a precedent for something being declared an invasion in the past, even if it's not related to immigration?
Yeah, since we're now been 3 years at this, earlier when he did this, it was largely about the cartels. One, the drugs that were coming in, the fentanyl that was coming in, but also the cartels having that operational control where they would send smugglers across the border, tie up border agents, and then, move down the border a bit and send people across that they knew wouldn't get caught by border agents because they were up, with the first. And the scouts and the communication systems, I mean, truly, our border agents for years have said they don't have operational control anymore, the cartels do. And the results of that, the deaths and the drugs and all of that, that is what initially caused Governor Abbott to declare an invasion. But over time, as the millions of people have increased, we were talking about the numbers earlier, and those on the terror watch list those on the terror watch list who are being captured by Border Patrol increases, just a data point. For the first 3 months of fiscal year 2024, Border Patrol agents, and they only operate between ports of entry, have caught 50 terror watch list hits in 3 months. Now, pre-Biden, that number was 3 in a full year. So there are more terrorists coming through, and we have to assume in that 1.8 million known got-away population, more are getting through. And, whether they're from Iran or Russia or China or, other countries that don't like us very much and who have threatened us, particularly after the October 7th massacre in Israel, is that an invasion? Are we being invaded by our enemies who are using new tactics, not using uniforms, not using visible arms, but sending large members of single-aged, military-aged adult males across our border? Is that an invasion? So we don't have a precedent of that scenario. You can go back to 1700s, 1800s, dealing with pirates and things like that. So very different facts.
Well, thank you so much for that overview. And then I wanted to ask about kind of a different constitutional issue, which is state by state sovereignty, where a lot of southern states, particularly Texas, have been sending buses of migrants northward. So to Chicago, to Cape Cod, to all these cities up north. What would the Constitution say about that? Like sending people to another state and then kind of giving it to them to deal with? Is there precedent for that? Does that bring up any issues with state sovereignty? We've talked about it kind of between the federal government and states, but I'm just curious about the relationship of states to each other and what obligations they have.
So when illegal aliens are
answer that before you answer that question, I just want to throw something in that I think is really interesting to have full disclosure. The federal government is sending people to various states on planes in the middle of the night themselves. The federal government is putting people on buses and sending them to different states. They are sending planes in the middle of the night. Isn't that true? It's not just Texas that's doing it. We're doing it openly, but the administration is putting people on planes and buses and sending them to other states anyway, but surreptitiously. I just want to acknowledge that before we go on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The federal government, the Biden administration, is giving billions of dollars to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and contractors to receive, process, shelter, transport, and give social services to illegal aliens, as you described. There's been the night flights occasionally captured on video. We're seeing now more videos get out on Twitter or X where some of these NGO volunteers or representatives are basically guarding rooms or shelters of illegal aliens, and they won't answer questions and they don't want video taken. It's very secretive. So yes, the Biden administration has been doing that for 3 years. They're seeking more money to continue doing that. But Texas has been doing it, and in Florida in some cases. is taking small numbers of illegal aliens. And keep in mind, when aliens are released into the US, the alien goes where the alien wants to go. And so most will go to where they have family living or friends or an acquaintance, where they have a job. And so many go to New York City, many go to Chicago, California, you know, the big states where there are large migrant populations. And so when Texas or Florida puts a number of illegal aliens onto a bus or onto a plane, those aliens are volunteering and acknowledging, yes, I am willing to go to New York City. I'm willing to go to Chicago. This has been a question before, and there's been evidence of, you know, they're signing a statement or whatever. They're not being transported somewhere against their will, because they get to choose where they get to go. And, you know, the numbers that we're talking about is a drop in the bucket compared to what Texas is experiencing every single day. Meanwhile, so it's a release valve for Texas and for some of these other states. Meanwhile, you have these sanctuary mayors and governors in Chicago and New York and California and Denver who, you know, they come to office and say, we're a sanctuary jurisdiction, we'll protect everyone, don't ask, don't tell, we're not going to cooperate with ICE. So you have some governors in the South saying, okay, you want these folks, here you go. And it has put a very interesting spotlight on this issue of the realities of being a sanctuary city, because the costs just go through the roof. And these cities cannot sustain these costs or shelter these volumes of people. And then you have, you know, other effects, schools overrun with too many students. You have schools being emptied out to become temporary shelters, kids losing rec centers, playgrounds, parks, because all to house and shelter these volumes of people. So it's this virtue signaling of sanctuary cities and policies running into the reality of mass illegal immigration.
Yeah, thank you for that answer, and thank you, Janine, for providing that additional context. I guess my question was more focused. I think what you were talking about with the federal government doing these transportation of immigrants, to me, I guess my question is more focused on the state by state relationship, whereas that appears to be a question of national government to state relationship. So I'm curious again about the state by state sovereignty issue. And I suppose it's helpful to know that the migrants are willingly being transported to states, but I suppose my question was not so much about whether the coercion of migrants, but more the autonomy of states. So whether the states that they're being transported to are being asked and solicited rather than the migrants themselves. So could you provide a bit more clarification on that more narrow constitutional question?
I'm not
and
aware.
I'd like to step in. I'd like to step in there too, because I think that there are a lot of states, are there not, that are surprised when these planes show up in the middle of the night, that they aren't even alerted. Is that true or not? Because Tova's bringing up some really great examples here that really need some clarity, because I think the Biden administration is sending people in the middle of the night, and the mayors are like, wait, we don't even know who these people are that are arriving. Is the government doing it too, or is it just the state of Texas?
And I'll jump in because we're over time on Tova's segment. So if we could have
but let's let her. I think she should answer this question. I think it's very important to answer the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
The lack of notice is happening across the board. So yes, many parties, the receiving parties are often not notified, whether it's the federal government who's bringing the illegal aliens or another state. It is interesting to note that in the immigration statute, in terms of refugees, the refugee agencies are supposed to notify states and localities ahead of time where these refugees are going to resettle, to avoid this very issue of too many people living in one area and not being able to get jobs or shelter, et cetera, and not over resettling in certain areas. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen often in normal, pre-Biden times, and it's certainly not happening now.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I'll now pass on to Joel and Jordan.
Oh, it's a great sticky subject. Jordan's got a question first.
Yeah, I'll start us off. I was curious about the real economic strain of so many immigrants coming in. So is there a sort of number that you use to really kind of find, what the strain is on a given area or just the country in general based on the numbers of immigrants? So let's say per 500,000 or per million, what are you looking at as the strain?
I don't have a particular formula for that. And states and localities will report out different ways or not report it out. I mean, for example, in Arizona recently, there's a hospital system that had reported the billions of dollars that they are not being paid for the services that they have to administer when people come directly into, say, the emergency room for primary care. And so they have bills that are going unpaid. If we're seeing people residing in airports or out on the street or in parks, there's obviously, not enough money there for shelters. If schools are being shut down because, it's more of a shelter issue, then these costs need to be, one, tallied up, and two, they should be reported. And this is a bit of a lack of transparency issue for some of these states and localities where they just don't collect the data because they don't want to report it, because then that shines a light on this illegal immigration problem. But as American taxpayers, that we absolutely should know what all this is costing. And so some of these sanctuary mayors are saying, well, then let's give work authorization to these migrants who are here so they can at least make some money. You run into a problem there because that is a strong pull factor. That's the number one reason people come here in the first place illegally, is to work. And so if you're giving them work authorization, you're continuing that magnet of future illegal immigration versus applying consequences and sending them back home.
It's an interesting topic because I love the legal discussion, and it helps us learn about how our country works, about when we're defining an invasion or we're trying to figure out what the founders meant by invasion and federalism and states' rights and sovereignty. But while that's, of course, very interesting and great to talk about, I wonder on a much more basic level, foundationally, does the federal government have any right to allow in illegal aliens into a place where citizens have constitutional rights? It's been built on a structure of government that, of course, we study on this show based on the Constitution, natural law, that you disenfranchise the rights of constitutional citizens by allowing in an illegal alien, which is not under the same restrictions, but then absorbs many of the rights of an American citizen just by being on our soil, because it's the country we've created, which is a testament to what we've done. But it's also a fact that when an illegal alien comes into the country, there is a definitive cost that the American pays. And oftentimes that cost is a modicum of American freedom. And possibly the answer is to make our immigration system much better and these people can come in, but also just a basic question of, while we should figure out what the founders meant by invasion, while we should look at the states to federal rights issue, isn't there a basic foundational issue that the federal government can't not regulate the border, and that every American has a right that every person that comes in is vetted and becomes a citizen before enjoying our rights?
Yes, so this comes down to the rule of law, and there have been a number of lawsuits against the Biden administration by the states. One went up to the Supreme Court, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court ruled that states don't have standing to argue that the Biden administration is not enforcing the law. Your options are either Congress don't fund these open border operations, and impeachment. And so actually right now, the House is considering that issue of impeachment of Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, for his systemic and willful refusal to enforce the laws and for loss of public trust. But basically, the Supreme Court has said, look, this is a political issue. Congress, you make the laws, either change the law or don't fund what this administration's doing or remove these officials if they are not enforcing the laws.
Yeah, it's so surprising to hear. I didn't realize that they had ruled that the Supreme Court had ruled on certain lawsuits that were brought against the administration. Do you think if we went back in time and we looked at this, Texas and the history of Texas, I don't. It seems like they would like. There's no question that if they felt like that in the late 1800s, if Texas felt like uh, keeping out anyone they wanted to keep out, that they would just do it and wouldn't wait for federal okay, or let the federal government tell them that you have to let people in. And I think that also that context probably matters too when we look at trying to figure out what the founders meant. That I don't think that our states at the time of when they joined the union um, would have let the federal government force them to have illegal aliens come in.
Right. Since this standoff a couple of weeks ago, 25 other states have joined with Texas. They say, we stand with Texas. Some have sent their own National Guard down there. And multiple governors and others have said, look, the states formed the federal government, not the other way around. We would not have signed up for this arrangement if the federal government was going to leave us high and dry, unable to protect ourselves. And so that's the issue of that we're facing right now.
Do you know if there's any you may not know, but you mentioned some things about the operational control of the border and things that the border patrol has gone through and things the cartel have done. Is there anywhere that our viewers and us can look at, because it almost sounds like a movie, like it just can't be that bad or that real? And I know I've seen some things, but I don't know if there's anywhere that you would suggest that people go to get a good idea of what's going on there, because it's almost fantastic in a bad way to hear.
Yeah, unfortunately, too few reporters go down there and show what's really happening. The White House has been effective at putting a media blackout on with mainstream media to cover a lot of this. But some of the reporters or investigators that cover this that are worth following include Todd Bensman from Center for Immigration Studies, CIS. Virginia Allen from Our Daily Signal was just down at the Texas border in the Eagle Pass area when the truck convoy went down this past weekend. She's made several border trips. She's good to follow. Let's see some others. Actually, an interesting one. Muckrakers embedded with caravans of illegal aliens as far south as Panama and came up through Central America with them. They put out a 40-minute video. I highly recommend watching that because that gives you a sense of the NGOs and the organization around these caravans and this mass migration. And it begs the question, who are these groups? Who's funding all this? And why? So those are a few to name.
Thank you. We'll pass it back and see if there's any more questions or audience questions.
Well, thank you, Jewel and Joran and Tova and Janine for some great questions today. And before we go to audience questions, we want to recognize our students and classrooms that are watching today. We have Thomas Parker, who is a professor at Eastern Kentucky University with 18 students in their honors program. Their class is called The Living Constitution, and they're watching our show today. So we'll give a shout out to the students at Eastern Kentucky University. We also want to thank our listeners on Las Vegas's KKVV 1060 AM. This program airs at 6 p.m. Pacific in Las Vegas every Monday evening. So thank you to everyone that listens on Las Vegas's KKVV. Now, going to our audience questions, Robert Zimmerman says, it's a constitutional crisis, really. Where is our Congress in questioning this lack of enforcement? And Lora, maybe, I don't know if it's in your bailiwick to talk a little bit about this deal that's currently going on in the Capitol, or maybe you could talk a little bit about what the Congress is trying to do.
Yeah, unfortunately, too few members of Congress have been really vocal about this crisis happening at our border. there's been too many members who just keep operating the same way as if we're still in the 1990s, and clearly we're not. And so the House passed an excellent bill called the Secure the Border Act back in May of last year that would actually remove a lot of these tools the Biden administration is using to implement its open border agenda. So it would prevent a lot of the asylum fraud. It would prevent the mass abuse of immigration parole. It would end catch and release. It would defund these NGOs that are facilitating illegal immigration, et cetera, et cetera. And so, meanwhile, the White House has asked for a supplemental, more funding for a number of things. One, more quote unquote border security, money for Israel, money for Ukraine, money for Indo-Pacific. And the White House put all those funding requests together. But pressure has been, if you want border security, Joe Biden, we need policy changes. And so three senators have been negotiating a border package behind closed doors for weeks, and they released it Sunday night. And unfortunately, it would not secure the border. It would give $7 billion more to pay off these sanctuary cities and to pay off the NGOs that have been carrying this out. And the policy changes would actually codify the very tools that Secretary Mayorkas and President Biden have been using. So it would continue to encourage more asylum fraud. It would give faster work permits, which again is exactly why illegal aliens come here in many cases, and encourages more illegal immigration. It would extend the definition of parole and codify that. It would allow a level of illegal alien encounters per day. So it creates this emergency border authority that can be triggered only after either 4,000 illegal aliens are encountered every day for 7 consecutive days, or 5,000 or 8,500 in one day. So it accepts and codifies these very high levels, crisis levels of illegal immigration each day, which renders this emergency authority meaningless. So it's a bad bill, and many senators have been quickly indicating they're not going to vote for it. It seems to be falling apart in the Senate.
Okay, thank you. Andrew K. writes, since neither the word border nor the word sovereignty is found in the U.S. Constitution or its amendments, and there's no overt prohibition against states protecting themselves, why is there an issue? Is it due to relevant case or tort law?
It's based on Article 1 that says Congress shall set the rules for naturalization. That has been interpreted as immigration, not just literal naturalization. And so that includes who may enter the US, where may they enter. And so that has resulted in we allow employment-based immigration, family-based immigration, humanitarian-based immigration. And it also, the law has developed to say who is not allowed to come in or who's inadmissible or who is deportable. And so then it is the Department of Homeland Security responsible to implement all that.
Okay, thank you. Brad Smith asked if the U.S. Supreme Court, he said, didn't the U.S. Supreme Court uphold the stay in Mexico law that was passed during the Trump administration? Why is that not being endorsed? Are you familiar with what he's talking?
If the question is about remain in Mexico, this is something that Congress passed back in the 1996 immigration law, and it had never been used before President Trump. So he was the first president to use it. And the concept was, if you come to our border and you apply for asylum, we'll let you apply, but you're going to wait in Mexico while your case is proceeding. We're not going to release you into the US and disappear, and maybe you do or do not eventually apply for asylum. And the program was a game changer. It stopped the caravans of illegal aliens that were coming. of course, there were lawsuits against it. And then when those were still ongoing, when the Biden administration began, it halted that program. The statute reads that the secretary may return someone to a contiguous country. It does not read shall. And so it was the states that sued the Biden administration saying, you halted the Remain in Mexico program. And because of that, we, the states, are suffering from large numbers of illegal aliens and the costs associated with it. That went to the Supreme Court, and the court said the statute reads may, not shall, and therefore the Biden administration was in the right to suspend the program because they are not required to do the program.
Thank you. Cher G asked, didn't President Biden meet with the president of Mexico, and what was the result of that?
They've met a few times. More recently, Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary Mayorkas went down to Mexico. We don't really know the details of it. The comments that those two secretaries made after the meeting were remarkably empty, vague. And since the meeting, we have seen Mexican army more engaged and some of the flows decreasing. So, some suspect that because the numbers were getting so high in December, it was, another record high number, that perhaps the Biden administration went to Mexico and said, look, we need your help here. You need to slow the flow, stem the flow, protect your southern border, Mexico, that sort of thing. And we have seen this over the decades where Mexico can kind of dial it up or dial it down either when they want to or when we ask them to, or, carrot and stick approach involved in diplomacy and negotiations. So that seems to be what has happened recently.
Well, thank you. And then Kasia Kaznoka asks, if opening the borders to illegal immigrants is clearly an act against the country's security, is there any law that protects citizens? Or can citizens do something or prove that it is an action against the security of the country?
Well, that's where they need to talk to their members of Congress in the House and the Senate and demand that the laws be enforced, that they not continue to fund the NGOs that are carrying this out on behalf of the Biden administration. And, after 3 years, the Secretary Mayorkas has not changed course. The numbers just keep going up. So that's why now we have the House working to impeach the secretary. There's elections, but those are the tools that we have in a representative government.
Well, thank you. And we have a couple of nice comments about today's episode. Boz writes, great session. Thanks for having it. And something that you just answered, as a concerned taxpayer, what should we do? And I think you just answered that. And then Robert Zimmerman says, terrific discussion and putting into perspective that 8 million immigrants equals our 15th largest state population is stunning. So we just thank you so much for being with us today. I'm going to go back real quick to Jewel, Jorn, Tova, Janine, and see if you all have any closing comments or questions.
Just want to say thank you. You really made this a great show with your wealth of knowledge and giving us clarity on this situation.
Yes,
Thank you. Happy to join you.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Laura. We really appreciate you being with us today, and we thank our audience, and we invite our audience to come back next week, Tuesday at 2 Eastern, and we will look forward to seeing everyone then. So thank you. It was a real honor to have you today, Laura. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Okay, thank you. Bye.